Every June, when the wind whispers through the wheat fields of Tilly-sur-Seulles, they say the fields scream.
The fields are screaming again!
Not the wind, not the tractors, human voices, thousands of them crying out all at once just before dawn.
The war never ended here.
No one dares to go outside when it happens, because everyone in this small Norman village knows something the rest of the world doesn't. The soil remembers. And what if I told you the land itself is still fighting the Battle of Normandy? Tilly-sur-Seulles. It's a quiet village tucked between Bayeux and Caen in northwestern France. Rolling fields, stone cottages, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. Except it did. In June of 1944, this peaceful farmland became one of the bloodiest battlegrounds of World War II. British troops clashed with elite German panzer divisions in what historians call some of the most brutal close-quarter combat of the entire Normandy campaign. Over 18,000 men were killed or wounded here in just 2 weeks. The earth turned to mud, not from rain, from blood. When the fighting finally stopped, the locals did what they had to do. They buried the bodies where they fell. Hundreds of them. Many were never identified. Many were never found. But that's not where the story ends. That's where it begins. In the spring of 1946, the farmers of Tilly-sur-Seulles returned to their fields. The war was over. Life had to go on. They planted wheat where tanks had rolled and plowed the earth where men had died. And that's when they heard it. Voices. Faint at first, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. Men shouting, in English, in German. Orders being screamed. The sound of boots on dirt. The farmers looked around. No one was there. The fields were empty. But the voices didn't stop. One farmer, an old man named Henri Leblanc, later told his priest that the wind wasn't making the sound. The wind was carrying it from below, from the soil itself. At first, people didn't talk about it. You don't admit something like that, not in a village trying to rebuild. But then the machinery started failing. Tractors would stall in certain spots and refuse to start again. Oxen would plant their hooves and refuse to move. Horses would rear and bolt, always in the same areas. Always near the places where the fighting had been fiercest. And always there were the voices. By the summer of 1946, the rumor had spread. The fields scream for those still buried beneath. The 1950s brought a new generation, but the phenomenon didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. An elderly farmer named Claude Renard kept a journal. In it, he describes waking at 3 in the morning every June, hearing what he called the same battle, replaying itself. He wrote about the sound of artillery in the distance, the rhythm of marching boots and the screams, always the screams. His children confirmed his account. They'd heard it too. Children would wake in tears saying they heard men running outside their windows. The local priest, Father Dubois, was called to bless the fields in 1959. He arrived at dawn with holy water and parishioners. They walked the rows of wheat, murmuring prayers. For a few days, the village was quiet. But on the 7th night, the screams returned, louder than before. Father Dubois never spoke publicly about what happened, but his housekeeper later said he refused to go back into those fields. He told her in confidence that the dead were not at rest, and no amount of prayer would change that. By the 1970s, the British War Graves Commission decided to investigate. A team of archaeologists arrived with ground-penetrating radar. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Dozens of remains. British soldiers, German soldiers, sometimes buried together in hurried mass graves. Helmets still on skulls. Dog tags fused to rib cages. The recovery took months. And during that time, something strange happened. After each body was removed and given a proper burial, the screaming would stop for a day or two. Then it would come back. Stronger, angrier, as if the land was mourning what had been taken. One of the archaeologists, Dr. Peter Kane, kept notes. In his final entry he wrote, "I can no longer work here. Last night I heard it. Not wind, not imagination. A chorus of pain rising from the earth itself. I don't know what we've disturbed, but I know this. We should have left them alone." He resigned 2 weeks later. Of course, skeptics arrived in the 1980s, armed with science and reason. They blamed wind acoustics, old irrigation pipes, mass hysteria. The locals listened politely, and then they said very calmly, Wine doesn't call your name, because that's what people had started reporting. Specific names. A woman named Marguerite Collet swore she heard her grandfather's name whispered in the fields. Her grandfather, a resistance fighter, executed in that very field in 1944. In 1987, the BBC sent a team to investigate. They set up state-of-the-art microphones in the fields overnight. When they reviewed the tapes, the crew went silent. For the first 20 minutes, just wind and rustling wheat. But then, faintly, a rhythm emerged. A distant pulse, like artillery fire. And beneath it, layered and overlapping, were voices. Unintelligible, but unmistakably human. The final 60 seconds are the most disturbing. The voices crescendo, rising in pitch until they sound like one single unified scream. Then, nothing. The BBC never aired that footage. Then, in 1998, something happened that changed everything. An elderly British veteran named Thomas Whitmore returned to Tilly-sur-Seulles. He was 83, frail, leaning on a cane. He said he'd been part of the 50th Infantry Division. He said he'd come back to confess. Whitmore's hands shook as he spoke. He said his unit had taken German prisoners during the final push. Young men, barely boys. They were outnumbered, low on supplies. They didn't have the manpower to escort prisoners back. So they made a decision. They marched the Germans into a crater and buried them. Alive. Whitmore said he could still hear their voices every night. He came back because he thought if he confessed to the land itself, maybe the screaming would stop. He spent one night in the village. He walked out into the fields alone at dusk. A farmer found him the next morning, sitting against a stone wall, eyes open, staring at the wheat. He was dead. Heart attack, the doctor said. But the locals knew better. That same night, the screams were louder than they'd been in decades. His family back in England later reported that the night he died, every clock in his house stopped at exactly 3:47 a.m. So where does that leave us? Scientists have tried to explain it. Priests have tried to bless it. Veterans have tried to confess to it. And still, every June, the fields of Tilly-sur-Seulles scream. The locals don't record it anymore. They simply close their windows, lock their doors, and wait for dawn. They understand something we don't. Some wounds don't heal. Some battles don't end. There's a theory, not a scientific one, but a theory that the soil itself is memory. That earth absorbs everything, blood, bone, fear, pain, bone, and in places where the violence was so intense, so absolute, maybe the land becomes a kind of recording, a loop, playing over and over, not haunted, not cursed, just unable to forget. If you ever find yourself driving through Normandy in June, you might pass through Tilly-sur-Seulles. You'll see the wheat fields, golden and beautiful. You might stop to take a picture. But if you do, listen carefully. Because if the wind shifts just right, you might hear something beneath it. Something faint, something old that sounds almost like a scream. The war never ended here. It just went underground. Maybe the screams aren't a haunting. Maybe they're a warning. A reminder that the cost of war isn't just counted in the living. It's buried in the earth, and sometimes the earth screams back. The people of Tilly-sur-Seulles make their choice every June. They stay, they endure, they remember. Someone has to bear witness to the voices that refuse to fade. Someone has to stand on soil soaked in sacrifice and say, "We hear you, we remember, you are not forgotten." The fields of Tilly-sur-Seulles scream, and they will keep screaming. Maybe, just maybe forever. Thank you for listening. What do you think is happening in these fields? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that explore the darker side of history, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Stay curious.